Okay, guys, we're probably gonna have a long chit chat today. So get ready. Basically, I just watched, I always come across the most random videos about religion. Anyways, we're gonna talk about the concept of religious psychosis. There's such thing as psychosis. There's such thing as religion. But now there are people who are claiming essentially that um when they when they converted to a religion or had a religious or spiritual experience, that it was just all psychosis and that they don't actually believe in it. And I feel like this is kind of someone who left the faith's way of kind of saying like what they experienced when they first got into Christianity wasn't real and that they kind of just made it up or something. Because I think it's just like they don't want to feel like they can't deny the experience that they had when they were in religion and what they felt, right? But when they leave, they also don't want to say, well, you left something that was it's easier for you to leave something and tell yourself, oh, it was all a lie, that what they experienced wasn't real and they just made up that whole thing. That whole, the belief system wasn't real. God's not actually real. I'm guessing if you're going from a Christian to an atheist, you basically have to say, well, my Christian faith and my Christian experiences and the spiritual things I felt when I was in church were not actually real. And in order to kind of prove their atheism in a sense, because it's also just like, does that mean that I basically think it's kind of like people trying to make atheism the um correct religion in a sense, um and kind of how they deal with the what they went through when they were a Christian, and they just, oh, I was just in religious psychosis, is kind of how they're explaining away those experiences that they did have in church or when they at one point believed in God. And this is like an interesting thing. I'd never really read it before. I've heard of psychosis. Um, Essentially, psychosis is not being in your right mind, essentially. Like, the person is not living in reality. But here's the thing, there are people, I feel like, and this is where I kind of feel like, okay, are you using this to just knock a specific religion or all religions? Because think about all of these the new age spirituality movement of all these people believing that they're entertaining all of these angels and the spiritual realm, and they're learning, doing all this astral projection and everything else. Like, they consider themselves spiritual, but are you going to label people who experience that also as spiritual psycho or religious psychosis? Or are you guys only claiming that it happens when someone used to be part of a religion and then leaves? I'm trying to figure out like what the purpose of it is or how people are explaining it. And basically, the video I watched of this girl said like, "Oh, you can't tell the difference between someone with religious psychosis and someone who really believes it." And it's just like, because what you're calling religious psychosis is literally someone just trying to explain away their religious experience as something they quote unquote made up because they didn't feel good enough or something. And I really feel like people only claim religious psychosis if they're an atheist who left a religion. I don't think people in the church are like, oh yeah, everything I believed, I just made all this crap up because I couldn't feel good enough about myself. Like, you are the only people who make that or claim it are people who have left. And I feel like it's their way of kind of denying the realness of what they experienced and chalking it up to, oh, it was all just emotions that my brain convinced me was true. But the thing about it is, you know, there's reality, and then there's, I feel like this is where I feel like perception is everything, but you can't deny someone's experience, right? Like, when you experience something that you can't explain and goes beyond, you know, the natural laws that of science, right? And you can't just chalk it up to, oh, I just had this emotion and that's why I experienced this thing. It's kind of just like you can't really deny an out of body experience, right? Or say like, well, I just my brain just made all of that up. Like, your experiences are your experiences. So anyways, it seems like the people making that claim, it's only coming from people who are leaving organized religion, essentially, because I don't see anyone who's an actual Christian saying like, oh, I only believe in God because I I don't know. I don't know how else to explain it. It's just like, it seems like it's an excuse people make to deal with their, to deconstruct their previous religious beliefs, essentially. That's what it's seeming like from the outside looking in. And I also think some people are even trying to say like every person who's religious is essentially under psychosis, which I also don't think is a valid argument to make. So anyways, I just thought that that was I guess, interesting perspective to hear from someone, as being like, I guess the reasoning for, or like once they stopped believing in God, they suddenly viewed their religious experience as them having psychosis. And I'm like, was the reason you stopped believing in God because you realized you have religious psychosis, or you stopped believing in God and then you decided you had religious psychosis? Because it really doesn't seem like there's a consensus on this. But I do think, though, I honestly think as humans, there's so many things that we experience that are not physical, that are spiritual. And like some of the main things that make our life, I truly believe, and I hate how people just chalk everything up to, it's just emotions, because emotions, God gave us emotions for a reason. Emotions truly are, in a sense, spiritual. They are not, you can't measure emotions physically. And your sense of feeling an emotion is not even like if I'm feeling love or if I'm feeling angry, like, you don't feel those things in like a real way, like, or in a physical way. In a sense, it's like it's a spiritual thing. It's I don't know, I just think like people are so quick to, like, when you're chalking up a spiritual experience to emotions, do you realize that emotion, the reason you can feel an emotion comes from a spiritual realness? It's like the fact that you can even feel an emotion is not this physically measurable thing. Like, when you think about what is love, like, if we consider love to be an emotion and love to also be like this super powerful thing, love is not something that you can measure physically. But most people would say, I believe love exists. It's like you can't, like, if you believe in emotions, you believe in a spiritualness of the human aspect of there's a spiritual aspect to emotion. So you're saying like spiritual psychosis meant that everything you experienced was just emotions, but emotions in and of itself are a spiritual experience. When you're experiencing an emotion, you are not experiencing it in a way that is physically measurable. And the way that you can react to actions that someone else has, it's like people can make us feel things, and that's like actually a spiritual thing to begin with. Like, why is it that someone doing something out, like not to you physically, can make you feel something? Like, the feelings themselves are a sign of a spiritual realness. I might not be like, I hope I'm making sense to people. So basically, chalking up the feelings you had in church as just being emotions is like denying the spiritual realness of humans as a whole. I also think I've thought about this a few times, how like our emotions are so powerful. I've listened to whole sermons just about emotions, because emotions can change your entire life. Emotions can lead us to make choices that could ruin our lives, can hurt people. Emotions can control people at times and make them do crazy things. So, emotions are these powerful things that people feel that have a huge role in their decision making. And emotions aren't even a physical thing you can measure. They're just things that we experience and feel as human beings. So, I don't think it's fair to like kind of just say, well, this is just emotions, right? Because emotions are a sign or a part of the spiritual realness of the human experience. Anyways, and it's also like it's another what's the term? Because I guess I studied psychology, which is just pseudoscience, because everything about psychology, you're studying the mind, and the mind is a concept in and of itself that cannot actually be physically measured. Like, we know what the mind is, but it's a concept that we use to understand how we think, because you're not just measuring brain waves. There's something behind what makes people think. But anyways, I always have I like to think about things from like a deeper perspective, because it's so easy to just listen to things surface level, but if you don't like dive deep into what you're actually saying and what you're talking about, you miss a lot of things. So basically, I don't think a religious experience is just an emotion. I think it's a experience. Like, if you've experienced the presence of God, it is a real experience, but it's also an experience that people can deny. It's an experience that people can move away from. It's an experience that people can say, well, maybe it wasn't real. Maybe that wasn't God. But it doesn't mean that they didn't actually experience God. So I think of things a little bit differently when it comes to like the spiritual aspect of religion, because the Bible tells us that I feel like being a Christian is a spiritual thing. It's not just emotional, it's not just mental, it's not just physical. Like, we are literally talking about a spiritual realm being real as a Christian. And so there's people who are saying like, oh, well, everything I believed as a Christian was just religious psychosis. But there's also these very real experiences that people have that are 100% spiritual and have no explanation scientifically in the physical realm, that, things doctors can explain, things science can explain. There's so many things that go beyond the measure of science. And I also think if you limit yourself to only what science can prove, you're pretty limited, honestly, in what you can actually believe, because there's so many things that exist that science does not know how it exists, how it works, how it began, how it came to be. So anyways, I don't limit myself to believing only what science says is and isn't true, because that's just not how my brain works. I don't look at scientific proof as being the end all be all, because the world existed before science did. Sorry, guys. Science is simply human understanding. But humans didn't create the world. Humans didn't create the planet. Humans didn't design the universe. So I think humans have a knowledge that is very limited, but also because there are humans who don't believe that there is, like, I believe in God because I just don't think it's possible to believe that everything exists without a purpose, without a beginning, and without a creator. I feel like the universe has a clear design. An intellectual person had to create the entire universe. When you study the science that is studying what already existed, you have to recognize that there is a design and function and purpose, and how all of these things just happen to come together in order for life to be able to exist. It's just like life can't have existed without a purpose, without a, like, someone had to design that intentionally. There has to be intent behind that. It's like you can't, I don't personally believe it is logical to believe everything happens at random for no reason, with no purpose. Everything just came together magically on its own, out of nowhere and from nothing. That to me is illogical based off of everything that we actually can observe in the real world. Like, there's never been something that just automatically magically appeared out of thin air in the natural world. So I think it's kind of nonsensical to, and we're not going to get into this because I've talked about this on other, like, the arguments for believing in God and not believing in God. There's plenty of videos you can talk about that. I'm just stating from my perspective, it does not make sense for the world to exist without someone having intellectually designed, planned, and created it. And I also think the humans who are atheists, I feel like, are limited to human knowledge. And human knowledge is limited because humans did not actually create the world that we live in. They didn't design the planet. They didn't create the animals. They didn't design the trees. It's like, do you ever think about the fact that we kind of just existed on a world that we did not actually create, but we still think we're the smartest things on the planet? Like, just think about that for a second. There's all these things, and I'm talking about, even if you believe in evolution, which I personally don't. I don't think of evolution as being the beginning of the world. I believe God created things with the ability to evolve, but they don't evolve into a completely different being, because it's not illogical. I've talked about why I don't believe in evolution, as far as evolution speciation. I don't believe there's such, like, I don't believe we evolved from monkeys at the end of the day, because it doesn't make sense. It's not logical. It doesn't follow logic in my opinion. But anyways, basically, if you follow the evolution, if you actually believe in evolution, you are believing that there's this universe that is so complex that we are studying it because we don't understand how it got here. But all of the animals that came before us are evolving and getting smarter quote unquote, in order to understand the world that is so complex that we couldn't even figure out how it works because we didn't actually create it ourselves. It's kind of just like, it's mind blowing to me how there are humans who think they are the smartest thing on the planet, but can't even tell you, like, we don't even you're studying the world. That is what science is doing. It's studying the world that we live in because we don't understand how it works. And if we don't understand how it works, how are we the smartest things on the planet? Someone had to design all of this. I'm sorry. And the person who designed all of this is the person who knows, has all the answers. And it's not humans. I'm sorry. Humans are not the answer. Are not. Other people are not the answer. And I had this thought a while ago. I'm like, if the smartest person on the planet doesn't know everything about the world, why are we even still contemplating and arguing about, where everything comes from? It's like the smartest person on the planet right now, if I asked him, how everything happened, they probably couldn't actually tell me. They couldn't even answer all my questions. So I just stopped, looking to human knowledge for answers to my questions in a lot of ways. Anyways, I think people have to remember that there's a lot of parts of our human experience that is not logical, is not scientific, goes beyond what science can actually understand and prove. Like I said, psychology and the study of the mind, emotions, all of those things are pseudoscientific, and they are not measurable scientifically, feelings, emotions, all of that in the third, but these are still things that have so much sway on the world that we live in. So you just can't you can't just be so passive of, people's experiences and be like, oh, they're just having an emotion. And I've heard this argument before, how like, oh, you can go to a concert and get the same feeling of God that you get in church. I think what people don't realize, though, it's like, yes, but you don't understand why that is. It's because, and this is going to go over some people's heads, the world constantly steals from religion. The world is trying to mimic the church, actually. And y'all don't actually realize that. We crave spiritual experiences at the end of the day. So you might not have a religion, a formal religion, in the sense of you don't go to church, but you still have a form of religion. And you're basically trying to get your religion outside of God, so you're seeking it through celebrities. You're seeking it through a musical artist. You're seeking these religious experiences outside of God because we crave that at the end of the day. We crave it's like, this is something so simple, but I remember a sermon about it. Like, God created us to worship, and our worship actually makes us happy as human beings. So that's why we love going to see our favorite artist. If you're going to a concert to see your favorite artist, it's a form of worship of that artist. That's what people don't understand. And I can feel like the wisdom in what I just said. God created us with a desire to worship. And if we don't worship God, we end up worshiping other things. So yes, you're having a religious experience going to this concert because you're worshiping the artist. And that's why God calls, God is jealous. And he says you're worshiping all these false idols. You're putting all of these other people, these objects. You might worship money. You might worship sex. You might worship power. It doesn't matter. But people have this desire to worship things And if you're not worshiping God, you're worshiping something else. So, yes, you actually did kind of hit the head nose on that with saying, you can get the same feeling of being in church at a concert, but the reason why actually still comes from church. And that's what people don't realize. And there's so many things that try to mimic church also. Like someone, I can't remember what video, if I can find it, but basically someone hit the nail on the head. Like, everyone worships in one way or another. We worship something when you're going to that football game and you're sitting in a stadium and there's this community of people coming together for the same purpose, for the same incense. You want your team to win, whatever. There's a religion in going to a football game. And you go through these patterns, you go through this course. The world is mimicking our worship of God in church, but in the form of false idols and in the form of, things that are not of God. Because at the end of the day, we want to worship something. God created us with a desire to worship. Some people worship themselves. Some people worship other people. Some people worship, it's just like, it sounds crazy to say it, and I'm using the religious term worship, but that's what you're doing. You're having the religious experience outside of the church when you're going to a concert because you're there to worship the artist. Instead of worshiping God, you're worshiping the artist. Instead of worshiping God, you're worshiping the football team. Instead of worshiping God, you're worshiping money. Whatever it is that you crave most in the world, or maybe you're even worshiping yourself. It doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, the reason people can feel a religion outside of it is because the world has created false religions, are ingrained within everything around us. Because ultimately, we live in a world that is ruled by the devil. And this is where people are going to be like, ah. Basically, though, the devil wants all of us to be distracted by all of these things. There's a reason why one of the major 10 Commandments is like, have no other gods before me. And think about it, when you read the Bible, what were the Jews constantly doing? They were constantly creating idols to worship instead of God. Think about the Oscars. The Oscars are also a religious, like, all of these celebrities come together to sit down to look at a preacher. It's like all of these things are mimicking the church. All of these things, the Oscars, all of these award ceremonies, they are all mimicking religion. But it's not the religion of God. It's not the religion that God created. It's it's literally like the devil's religion at the end of the day. Anything that the devil can get you to worship instead of God, he wants you to be distracted by all of these things outside of God, outside of Jesus, to keep you distracted, to keep you away from the worship that will actually fulfill you. Because honestly, as a Christian, there's no better worship than worshiping God. Like, real worship of God is actually the best feeling ever. And I get it. That's why I'm not denying that you have the same experience in a concert, because you're mimicking what God actually created for the church. It's a counterfeit. All of these things are counterfeit churches. It's a counterfeit religion. You're watching these award ceremonies. You have all these people presenting things on stage, pretty much pretending to be preachers. Why do they always mock religion in these huge ceremonies that are non-quote-unquote religious? Like, even thinking about like how many, people say, well, they make this mockery. Have y'all ever noticed, and I think like this is where I'm probably going to end on, but there's so many celebrities who make jokes of the Oscars or whatever. I keep mentioning the Oscars because Oscars is kind of like the most obvious one. Like the medal, the award itself is just like, it has a very like just dark theme to it. But I just remember some actor made the joke about like the Oscars being their church or their religion or something along those lines. And I was just like, yeah, like this is literally just like the Met Gala too. It's just like they're all meeting together as a form of worship. They're just not worshiping God. That's the only difference. But all of these people, everyone is a part of, is everyone encounters and craves a religious experience in some sense. You just might not be actually worshiping God. Some of y'all are just worshiping other things. So basically, that's kind of where I'm going to end this video, because there's like a lot deeper you can go into it. But I wish I could find this video because it made like, there was a video I watched that explained it way better than I'm explaining it, because it even like, it shows like the one-to-one comparison of like how people go to church on Sundays, and like the same kind of how there's the same method in as going to church with have like going to a football game or going to a baseball game, and everyone stands up and everyone like they tell you to do this and you do it, like the rituals that happen outside of church and like other aspects, and how there's like a religious aspect in all of these false things that is similar to a church experience. So it's just like, they're just counterfeit. It's a counterfeit faith. It's a counterfeit religion. It doesn't serve, the true God. So it's just like, you're getting the desire to worship out, but you're worshiping a counterfeit. So it's never satisfying. It's never fulfilling. Anyways, I think that's what I'm going to end it at. If I can find the video, I will link it because it was a really good. It just showed like how we all desire to worship. Like there's a desire in all of us to worship. And this is a thought I want to share really quickly, because this is something really deep that I feel like I want to say, like, it's something really deep that God kind of showed me a while ago. Like, and it's a really, it's not gonna, everyone's not gonna understand it. But it was just a thought of like, what if God knew? Let me see if I can find it, because I feel like I'm losing it. It's not even what if God knew. It was basically like, God knows the desires of all of our hearts to the fullest, because he created each one of us. He designed each one of us. So it's like, God knows what we're passionate about. God knows what we love. God knows what we don't like. And it's just like, God knows us very intimately because he created and designed all of us. But basically, he also knows what actually will fulfill us in the long run. And so the thought I had, and I'm kind of losing it, it was basically like like God knows what is going to fulfill us and make us feel whole. And it's like, God knows that he is capable of fulfilling the desires of our heart, but we never trust him enough to do it, and we try to seek it out in all of these other things, when really, if we just sought God for the answers, because he already knows what's going to make us happy in the long run, instead of constantly following what we think we need and what we want and what the world tells us we should want. And it's kind of just like, we never get the satisfaction because we're always seeking things outside of God's will. I guess that's more understandable for someone who's a Christian to understand. But it's just like, God already knows what desires we have and how to fulfill them, and we just have to trust him to fulfill those things. When we trust ourselves, you know, we don't always get the result that we want. And that's something I guess that I could relate to a lot with my current situation, which I've talked about so much, but it's just like we're getting to a point where it is going to get more and more apparent. I personally do think the world is getting more and more demonic. You know, people are more comfortable just doing evil in plain sight now. Like, there really doesn't seem to be any type of shame for people doing some of the most horrendous, rude, heinous crimes. Let's think about Sonia Massey, who, you know, I've been seeing her story everywhere. I did not look up all the details. Not because I don't care. I just don't want the trauma of reading about it again. But essentially she was killed by a cop in her own home. And her last words were like, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." And I was thinking the other day, how crazy is it that I'm like, we really are living in the end days. Because the last thing this woman said before she was killed was, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." And I felt like, as a Christian, hearing that, it broke my heart. Because I was also thinking, like, why? It kind of, to me, I don't think that Sonia Massey, she knew she was encountering something demonic, like, for her to rebuke that. And part of me thinks, like, why wasn't that demon, like, rebuked when she said it? Like, she said it and then gets shot in the face, basically. So I was thinking, as a Christian, how this, like, just demonstrates that the evil in this world is getting stronger than our faith in Jesus at times. And it's crazy. And the Bible even says, like, people are, like, the Bible tells us, like, Christians will be martyred for their faith and things like that. And basically that demon in that cop attacked her right after she rebukes him in Jesus' name. So it's just, we're living in such an evil times, and just reminded me of, y'all, I did a story time about this. You know, I was attempting to go out, which I should not have been doing, and I pretty much encountered the aftermath of a triple shooting. Unfortunately, I do believe I witnessed the person who got killed on accident, and I can still, like, picture it in my head. And it's so sad to think about, like, there's literal, you know, there's so much demonic activity basically happening in our world right now. And it's just like, where are all, like, the real Christians doing? Because it's just like, it seems like the world is getting worse and worse and worse. And I also think I've noticed, because I guess the Olympics are started today, and I just remember I looked on Twitter or X, and, like, satanic was trending, and I did see, like, a little clip of the opening of the Olympics, and it did look very demonic to me. And I also think too, like, people who are not Christians watching my channel are probably gonna be like, why is she always saying things are demonic and satanic? And it's just like, you understand those things more as your faith in God gets deeper, because there are things that I used to not even turn a blind eye for. But the closer you get with your relationship with God, like, the easier, like, you just feel it. I can't explain it. You just feel a sense of like, this is demonic. Like, you shouldn't be watching it. I guess it's like the Holy Spirit essentially telling you, like, this is not of God, you need to turn that off. And I get that feeling also when I'm listening to certain songs, because I used to be able to just listen to music. I wasn't even listening to the lyrics, but now it's like I'm hearing the lyrics and how, like, there's so much demonic lyrics in music as well. Like, I was listening to Charlie XCX new album, and there was a song, and there's like it was just like a very like it was like a mockery. It was mocking Jesus essentially. I was like, ooh, I can't listen to this. Like, I can't listen to this artist like mock God and mock Jesus and mock, you know, just certain things. And like, people are so comfortable doing that. And I'm like, why is Christianity so openly disrespected? Unlike other religions, like, think about, like, we don't openly disrespect Muslims, or I'm not even gonna say, you know what, the crazy thing is, Jewish, I feel like the craziest thing about the three major religions is they're all kind of connected in some way. However, Judaism directly correlates with Christianity, and then Islam has a tie back to Judaism, because if you read the Old Testament, there's a second son. Like, they basically believe that they are the other son. I think Ishmael. I can't remember whose son in the Bible he was. But basically, Islam stems from that person. But all three Abrahamic religions are connected in some way, but they also don't all have the same beliefs, obviously. Like, but Judaism and Christianity are directly correlated. I would say Islam is like not necessarily correlated because it kind of goes off into something different. But it like says, but Islam itself, I think, says like without the Bible it can't be true or something. So it does like take from the Bible, and yeah, that's a whole nother story. I think there's a lot of other people who make videos about it. I'm not like knowledgeable in Islam, so I'm not going to go into it. Basically, I do know that there is some connection in Islam to the Bible. But anyways, but out of those three, and the reason I was making that point, I'm like, there's three religions that correlate to the same thing, but we only mock one of them. Like, why is that? Why is only Christianity openly mocked? Why is Christianity the only religion that is made fun of in television and in movies and openly on the radio and just openly on the public and in the newspapers and in everything? Like, why is this the one religion that's always targeted? My friend also had made this comment to me, how it's weird that the only religion that has like an opposing religion, because the Satanic Church is also a thing, is Christianity. Like, there's a huge force that goes against Christianity and against Christians and against Jesus and against the Bible. And I've said this before, the only reason you would be putting that much effort against a religion is if it was true. I said this before. I said the devil's not going to attack other lies. He's going to attack the truth the hardest. If you're a liar, if you're a manipulator, and someone else is also lying, you're not going to attack that person. You're going to attack the person telling the truth the hardest, because you want to silence them the most. And I honestly think like the reason that there's so much hate towards Christianity and Christians and Jesus and the Bible, and why people so openly mock it, is because it's the only religion that has truth to it. There's truth in Christianity, and that's why it has to be attacked the most. But that also just creates a lot of unnecessary animosity. And even like other religious groups dislike Christians the most. Like, you know, there are Muslims who specifically target Christians to make them turn them into Islam. And it's like they just extremely dislike Christians, more so than like even Jewish people. It's just like weird that there's so much animosity and hatred towards Christianity specifically. And even from the people who leave Christianity, they like attack Christians the most, but never other religions. They only attack, Christians. So I always have found that to be like interesting, that there's all this hate for Christians. And I guess like the reasoning that people give for it is like, well, Christians are doing so much harm. But what harm are they actually doing? Because no one can ever point out anything except they don't like Christian beliefs. Like they don't like that most Christians are pro-life, anti-abortion. What's the other one they don't like? I feel like those are the main ones. Like Christians get hated on for being pro-life. I guess the gay marriage. I forgot about, and I guess their stance on LGBT, which this one is also interesting to me. I don't want to dive too much into it. I think that I made a video talking about like Christianity and the LGBT community, and how these two communities are like heavily kind of pitted against each other because they kind of are on, but I feel like the reason for it is not what people think it is. But I don't think that Christians are actually, I feel like it's almost a one-sided beef. Like it's more like, I don't know how to explain this. I feel like people in the LGBT community that a lot of them feel targeted by the Christian community, because the Christian community what am I trying to say? I just blinked, y'all. Basically, I feel like there's a lot of church hurt within people in the LGBT community who don't feel supported by Christians. And a lot of the reason they don't feel support by Christians is based off of their feelings about the LGBT. And also built around the identity politics of being LGBT. And that's something I would have to dive into in another video, because I feel like it's a lot more to it than just, Christians. Because I've also commented on someone else's video they made, like how they went to a church and they had to leave because they didn't support LGBTQ community, and how that was something she needed for her church to support in order to want to go to church. And to me, that's like I don't know. That's a whole nother topic I would have to talk about, which I don't think I'm going to talk about that anytime soon. But basically, it was just like interesting to hear like that people basically seek out churches that support their political views in a sense. And it's just like the basis of them going to a church is based off of their political stance, which I personally don't think a political stance should be the reason you do or don't go to a church. And I also just don't think that I don't think either political party truly represents the church or Jesus. So I'm pretty non-political. Like, I do not fully support one party or the other because they both definitely have a lot of faults. Neither are perfect, and I just don't really don't involve myself too much in politics. I just don't find them to be great. Anyways, this was a very long video. Basically, I was just trying to explain the weird way that I feel like it's only atheists claiming they had religious psychosis, right? No person who believes their religion is saying they're under psychosis, because I'm like, real faith in something is not, you're not out of your mind. If you're choosing to believe something in your right mind, that is not psychosis. I think like the only way you can see it as psychosis is for you're trying to convince yourself that your experience wasn't real, even though you had to have a real experience. Like, you can't make up an experience. I think this is also another stance that I have. Like, I believe people when they say they experience things, even if they're not things that I agree with. So, for instance, like, perception is reality to a certain extent. Like, how you perceive the world is your reality, but then there's like perception, and then there's reality. So like, there's a actual reality, and then there's how you perceive the reality. So like, what you might perceive as a ghost in reality is a demon. This is gonna go over people's heads. Okay, so if someone who's non-religious, they don't believe in demons, they don't believe in hell, but they have a spiritual experience with something that they might say they perceived as being an angel, but there's a reality of it. There's what they perceived it as an angel, but according to the Bible, there's such thing as fallen angels, and according to the Bible, there's angels who walk around, or demons who pretend to be angels of light. So there are people who go into New Age spirituality. They're having all of these spiritual experiences that they think are with good things. But me, from a Christian perspective and reading my Bible and knowing the word, I'm like, that's what you're perceiving to be angels are actually demons pretending to be angels of light. Because they're basically using... And this just goes into, I hate getting into this. This is going to make this video longer. Practicing witchcraft is a form of spirituality, but it's a spirituality that does not come from God. It comes from demons. And so you're not interacting with angels. You're interacting with demons, because it's rooted in like demonic spirits, which is why the Bible tells people don't practice witchcraft or divination. All of these things, like tarot card reading, is also considered demonic, because you're using spiritual things outside of how God intended them to be used. And it's demons that are, people end up interacting with in actuality. But basically, as a Christian, I believe the reality is people having these spiritual experiences, even if they perceive them to be angels, and to be good spirits, that the reality is they're actually communicating with these demonic spirits. Because God is like very clear in his word. Like, the only spirit that is of God is the Holy Spirit. And also, you know, um, people who are usually having these out of body experiences, whether it's because of it's drug induced or it's because of a near death experience, you know, they are in a and this is why I said I believe people experience it how they said they experience it, but the perception of what they experience is different based off of what that person believes at the end of the day. And I think this is where this is a something I'm saying because there are people who are non-religious who are going to say, well, everyone who has a near-death experience experiences whatever from a place of what they already believed in. So if you're a Muslim, you have a near-death experience, you see Muhammad. If you're a Christian, you have a near-death experience, you see Jesus. If you're in like XYZ, and they pretty much just like pinpointed to like, oh, it's just your brain creating what you already believed in. But I feel like there has to be a reality to all of these experiences. Like my brain can't be like, well, every person just creates their own reality and that's what's real. True, it's true to a certain extent, but also there's still like there's only one truth. Everything can't be true. Every religion can't be true, right? So there's also lots of testimonies of people who've experienced hell. There's lots of testimonies of people who've experienced heaven. And then you have this third range of people who were probably not religious, who have NDEs and they experience a spiritual being, but they don't say that spiritual being is connected to any one religion. And that this is the new age spirituality I'm talking about, because new age spirituality is not biblical, and it's also like it's not tied to any one religion. So it's just like everyone's your personal experience and what you believe you experience type of thing. So it's not following like any one truth, which is what makes it like, okay, is what you experienced, I believe you experienced, but what is the reality of it? Because it's not technically giving, it doesn't have a what's it called, there's not a stability to it, right? Like I can sit here and say that there's a lot of testimonies of people who experience hell. There's a lot of testimonies of people who experience heaven. There's a lot of testimonies of people who say they met Jesus during an NDE. And then you have near-death experiences of people who say, well, I met with this spiritual being that I believed was good, and he told me that they knew all of the answers to life, right? But that person that they're saying that they met doesn't have a name, is not like this constant in every person's experience. So that's something that I always found to be like interesting, and wondered like, what are they perceiving essentially? Because I feel like for me, I've gotten to a point where I'm pretty solid in my beliefs. Like, I believe in Jesus, I believe in the Bible. The foundations of the Bible have the most logic to them. It's founded on something that has not changed. There's proof of the word, what's in the Bible still existing today. So there's the burden of proof for the Bible is actually pretty massive. But also it's just like when you actually read the Bible, it's like every type of story you could tell exists in the Bible. Like, I just want you guys to imagine, like, any movie, any story that you can watch, those stories all existed already in the Bible. It don't matter what type of story you're talking about. Like, the Bible is like every story that's ever been told was told in the Bible already. Which I think is just like incredible to even think about. I mean, like, good, bad, ugly, it doesn't matter what it is. Wars, a war movie, there's stories about that in the Bible. It's just like, it literally is the foundation of everything that people know, and it's way deeper than what people can even comprehend. And you can read the Bible and study the Bible and learn something new every time you read it. And I've never read another book that you can read it, like, when you're reading a normal story, the story doesn't change. You don't, it's like you can reread the same book, the story that's being told is the exact same story every single time. But when you're reading the Bible, the craziest thing about reading the Bible is I can read the Bible and learn something new each time, even if I'm reading the same exact chapter over and over again. It's so crazy how it's like, people say like the Bible is living, and I'm like, I can't explain it other than it's just like, like, you can read the Bible and it's still like the things in the Bible still apply today. And this book was written 2,000 years ago. It still applies. There's still concepts and wisdom and things that it talks about that still apply to this day and age. So that's something I've always found like amazing about the Bible. But also just, I can reread the Bible over and over again and get something new and find something new and relate to something different each time. So it's just really like one of the greatest books ever written. I do think though, like, you can read the Bible and not understand it, for sure. There's a lot of people who read the Bible but don't understand it. In order to understand the Bible, you do have to have faith. That's just a part of it. Like, you're not going to get the message of the Bible without faith. But anyways, I went into a way different direction than what this video started as. Basically, I just wanted to share my thoughts on atheists, I guess, using religious psychosis to explain their spiritual experience in church, but also show that, you know, they're not wrong. Like, it doesn't mean that them believing it was psychosis does not mean it was actually psychosis. Is what I'm saying. Like, you're telling yourself you weren't in your right state of mind when you were a Christian. And maybe, like, there's such thing as, like, being manic and, you know. And also people are saying, like, oh, I was only religious because of trauma. And I no longer, you know, need it to feel good. I also just wonder too, and this is just the psychologist brain in me thinking, I'm like, I wonder like how they viewed their religion with God to begin with. Like, were they a Christian who, like, maybe they were too focused on seeking a feeling, right? And then when they couldn't feel God anymore, they stopped believing in him. Because I feel like that's a common almost type of thing, and it's something that I've almost struggled with myself as a Christian. Like, I don't always feel God's presence, but I still believe he exists because I have faith at the end of the day in God, whether I feel him or not. And it's just like, why I know God is real is because there's personal experiences that you just can't make up. Like, I can't deny my experiences with God. And even if I don't feel God's presence with me at all times, I never forget the experience I had. And so I can never deny God's existence. That's just how I feel personally about it. So I'm kind of like wondering if, like, where maybe some of the people who had or experienced had like a really strong or powerful experience with God, like where if they kept seeking that feeling and when they stopped getting it, they were told themselves, well, maybe I just made it up and God doesn't actually exist, and basically said, well, I never felt it again, so I guess I just made it up, and was going through religious psychosis. I just wonder, like, what or how that person came to that conclusion, or maybe they just feel like, well, I was in such, because a lot of people do find God when they're going through hard times, and going through rough times is usually when people seek out God, when you feel like you have no other option or answer. But once they've overcome that, they are basically like, well, I guess I don't need God anymore, so like, bye. Or if someone was saying like, oh, it was my trauma, like I just had all this trauma and looked for God to heal it for me, and then realized, oh, I could do this for myself, which again, I feel like is just like moving towards, like I said, we all have a desire to worship. That person just desires to worship themselves when they're saying like, I can be my own healer, I can be all of these things myself. You're basically just putting yourself, leaning towards self-worship. Like, you want to have all the power, you want to have all the control. And I feel like that's also a common thing, honestly. I feel like a lot of people would rather be their own God and believe in their own power and believe in their own divinity, in the sense, which, you guys, if you go back to Genesis in the Bible, is the very first lie the devil told to Eve, was you can be like God. You can be your own God. You don't need God. So the devil never stopped telling the same lie to people, and people never stopped falling for it. But anyways, yeah, I just think the psychologist in me, or I should say, I should stop calling it the psychologist in me, just the side of me that tries to understand where people are coming from, like how exactly. And I guess watching the videos, they kind of say it, why, which is why I used the examples I did, because someone had said like, oh, it was just my trauma response, or I realized I was in control of my own healing and didn't need God to heal. So it's just like, those were some of the comments I read on the video. But yeah, that's my kind of, I guess, thoughts or take on it. I do think, again, we have a desire to worship, which is why even if we're not worshiping God, we find ways to worship, and we find a religion in other things outside of God. And that's how I'm going to end my video.